Hello, Stephen Bedard here, and I was sent a video by someone, and the video was by the skeptic apologist, and I will call him an apologist because that's really what he's doing for skepticism. Uh, Apologia, which is I guess, a take on apologia, but his name is Apologia, or the handle that he uses, and the video that was sent to me was three Christians bury apologia on the Jesus burial. And so there's a play on words there, and there's a little bit of sarcasm as well, because he's responding to three Christian apologists who criticize what he is saying and attempt to disprove his suggestion that the body of Jesus after the crucifixion was just disposed of. Either it was left on the cross or was thrown in a ditch, but it wasn't buried as the Gospels suggest. And so I want to just share a few thoughts on that. I'm not claiming that I'm going to bury apologia on this, but I will try to share just some thoughts to put things into context. So, can we prove one way or the other that Jesus was buried in a tomb? Well, I don't think so, not really, but it's pretty hard to prove one way or another just about anything that happened 2,000 years ago. We can look at the evidence that's there and we can make judgments based on that evidence, but that doesn't necessarily prove it. We actually know very little with absolute certainty what happened even much more recently than 2,000 years ago. But that's not to say that we can't say anything. One of the things that Apologia presents in his video is that we really only have one source for this idea that Jesus was buried in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. And he makes a comment about Mark being the earliest gospel, which I accept. I believe that Mark was the earliest gospel. And then he speaks about the synoptic problem. And the synoptic problem basically is the idea that there's a lot in common between Matthew, Mark, and Luke, much more than you would expect than if they were just happened to be people who were remembering the same kind of events. There seems to be some copying going on. And again, I accept that. I accept that that Matthew and Luke used Mark. That I don't think is a huge problem. I find that people like Apologia will throw these things out there sort of for shock value towards conservative Christians, because many conservative Christians think that Matthew just sat down and wrote out his memories, and then Mark sat down and wrote out his memories, and Luke sat down and wrote out what he was told, and they just happened to agree, and there you go, there's proof that the Bible is true. And so by presenting the synoptic problem, that's supposed to shock people into thinking, wait a minute, you mean the Bible isn't as reliable as I thought? I don't think the synoptic problem has anything to do with reliability of the Bible, and there's plenty of evangelical scholars who accept the synoptic problem. They might have a few different views on it, but there's a lot of acceptance. So I actually don't think that it says a whole lot. And even if we only have what Mark says and that Matthew and Luke borrowed from that, although I would say that in the Passion narratives, Matthew and Luke do have some of their own stuff. They're not only copying from Mark, but even if it is just Mark, I don't think that that's necessarily a big thing. I also want to comment on the idea that Paul never talks about the empty tomb, and uh, that might be evidence that there was no concept of an empty tomb. And I don't think that that's an issue. I think that Paul, when he neglects to tell us about the empty tomb, it's not that he's denying that there was a tomb tradition that was there. It's simply that that wasn't a part of what he was interested in. And it's just as easily that he was assuming that. Surely Paul was aware that Jesus was the son of Mary, but he never mentions Mary. He even talks about Jesus being born of a woman, which would have been a perfect opportunity to mention Mary, but he doesn't mention Mary. But that doesn't prove that Paul had no understanding of Mary, or that Mary was the mother of Jesus. He just wasn't interested in sharing that. Was probably assuming that his audience already knew about that. Just as I think when Paul talks about the resurrection, that he just assumes the empty tomb. But I don't think that we have to worry too much about Paul in here. One of the things that bothered me in Apologia's video, as he talks about the way most often the victims of crucifixion were treated, he makes it sound like we have all kinds of information right from the time of Jesus, so contemporary with Jesus, about how they treated crucifixion victims, especially within Judea. And we actually don't have a whole lot. When we look at some of the writings that we have, they are from after the time of Jesus, a lot of them. And in fact, one of the main writings, which is a summary of Roman law, which is really written in the Byzantine era, I believe it's like the 6th century, something like that. That doesn't give us a whole lot of reliable information as to what was going on in terms of how these things worked in the 1st century and during the time of Jesus. I think one of the main ones we have is Seneca the Younger. And I think it is a reasonable thing to say that most often the bodies of the people who were crucified were left in a ditch or left on the cross or something like that. I don't have a problem with that. But as Apologia admits, that there were exceptions, and he makes it very clear. In fact, it seems as if some of the Christian apologists who were critiquing him didn't seem to catch that. And so I will give Apologia credit for admitting that there were exceptions, and we find that in different places. In fact, one of the few places that is contemporary with Jesus is Philo. In his writing Flaccus, he acknowledges that there are some exceptions to what happened with the bodies of crucifixion victims. And so there are times when they were given a burial, and Apologia admits that, but I think falls back on the fact that those are exceptions to the rule, and the rule was that they were just left. And so probably when you're looking at likelihood, it probably was that Jesus was not buried. Except for we have this thing, even if it's just from Mark, where it talks about Joseph of Arimathea. And Apologia seems to think that that's most likely explained by legend. And the reason he goes there is he sees that as being linked to the resurrection narrative. And as soon as something is linked to something supernatural, that makes us call into question its validity. And I don't think that that's really very convincing. First of all, when I read the Passion narratives, I see the Joseph of Arimathea part as being more linked to the crucifixion narrative than the resurrection narrative. And I think most scholars, not just Christian, not just religious, not just theist, will admit that Jesus probably was crucified. So I don't think that it is all that linked to the resurrection. But even if something is linked to something supernatural, the fact is, when we look at those Roman writers, the historians and biographers and other people from that era, they're working within a supernatural framework. They accept that there are miracles that take place. They assume things like prodigies and other prophecies and things like that. One of the things Apologia talks about is that the Gospels are not these dispassionate narratives that are completely unbiased. Well, show me anything either in the ancient world or even in the modern world that fits that description. Everybody has something that they are pushing. Focusing just on the ancient world, I would say every writing, especially every history or biography or anything like that, has an agenda, whether it is religious or philosophical or political, whatever it might be. Every single one of them had a bias. There is no dispassionate narrative when it comes to history. And I don't really think that we have gotten to that place today where we can say that something is completely unbiased. We can note the bias and we take that into account, but that's not necessarily something that would make us discount it. And to tell the truth here, when it comes to the way we do history, the fact is, skeptics, when they look at the Gospels or other early Christian history, they want to use a different way of interpretation than the way historians actually use ancient texts. Because if we were looking at the story of a Jesus and he wasn't the founder of the largest religion in the world today, that he was just a religious teacher from back then, and no one continued to follow him for very long. If we looked at, even if we only had one biography of him, one gospel, and we read that Jesus was crucified, then was buried in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, I would say almost every historian would accept that. Like, unless you have a real good reason to reject it, that there was somehow evidence against it, perhaps there's another writing around that disagreed with that and gave you a reason why you should be doubtful about the Joseph of Arimathea tradition, we would accept that. I read a lot about ancient history, and it's amazing how often historians, they will read a reference like Jesus being buried in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, something as simple as that, and they take it at face value unless there's a reason for us to disbelieve it. And so I find that skeptics really just don't do history the way other historians do history. I also want to comment about a phrase that Apologia often uses in his video, for the Bible tells me so. And I guess he's referring to apologists or other Christians who will accept things simply because it's in the Bible. And I realize that when we do history, we have to look at all kinds of different things there. And yes, there are a lot of people that, you know what, if the Bible tells me, then I believe it, and that's enough. But I would also say that he uses it in such a way that if it's just in the Bible, then we need to discount it because that's scripture. Well, that's not really the way we do history. We can use whatever text is available, whatever was written near the time that is relevant to what's going on, and whether or not it falls into the category of scripture or whether or not people today think that that is inspired or not, that's besides the point when we do history. We just look at it, and the Bible is the relevant text for us. And so I don't think that we discount something just because it's in the Bible. Yes, it has great rhetorical power to say, oh, for the Bible tells me so. It's like a little kid's song, and so he can discount what Christians are saying. But when we look at it from a historical perspective, the Bible is very relevant when it comes to this. So that's what I have to say about Apologia's video, 3 Christians Bury Apologia on Jesus' burial. I don't think that I have buried Apologia. I don't think I've proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that Jesus was buried in Joseph of Arimathea's tomb. I think that the best evidence that we do have, because we don't have any other traditions saying where else his body went after that, I think that based on the way historians normally use texts and the evidence that's available, that it's more likely than not that he was buried in Joseph of Arimathea's tomb. And this wouldn't even be an issue if it wasn't for people seeing that if you accept that perhaps you're going to give a toehold to an argument for the resurrection of Jesus. And I do believe in the resurrection of Jesus, but I don't think the tomb story is necessarily proof of that. And we can accept that aside from whatever we might think about the resurrection. So that's all I have to say about this video. I would love to hear your thoughts. Do you think that Jesus was buried in a tomb, or was his body simply discarded? And what is the basis of your view? I hope you visit me at my website, which is stephenjbedard.com. And if you want to find the apologetics area of that website, just go to stephenjbedard.com/apologetics. Thank you, and God bless.